Hi, my name's Lee McMahon. I'm the front of house engineer for the 1975s, still at their very best world tour. We are in Oslo, Norway today, and I've had a lot of comments and stuff on socials about people wanting to know what we're doing audio-wise for this tour. As we're kind of coming to the end of this cycle, figured I would do a little bit of a rig rundown. Let's get into it. The console is a Quantum 7 by Digico. Originally I started on the 338, and as the channel count grew and the requirements of the show sort of grew, this was the logical decision. My partner in crime, Francois, on the monitor side of things, he's using a Quantum 5 and I'm on a Quantum 7. During the summer, I was doing a lot of the broadcasts for festivals, so the addition of having the redundant engine was, kind of became a bit of a paramount thing, so that was a big point. But also for the way that this show has been structured, at times there has been this blurring of lines between it being theatrical as much as a rock and roll show. So being able to get at lots of things quickly became really important. The additional faders on the top deck and some of the channel count restrictions that exist on smaller consoles. This console basically just does everything that we could ever want for this show. It's never really said no, so that's been amazing. When I started on this show, it was a logical decision for me to go to Digico. The band really care about how the show sounds, and being able to try and replicate album elements and production techniques in the live environment is something I really care about as well. So it was a bit of a no-brainer, so here we are, and it's been great. I've loved mixing on it every single show we've done. There's many reasons why I use this platform, but one of the big reasons is the macro functionality. Being able to have a one button push to do X amount of parameters is fantastic. The console has a GPI function that I utilize quite a lot, which are a blend of foot pedals and custom buttons on the surface. And that enables me to do a bunch of stuff that you could do manually, but it would take a minute to do so. For example, on the control group layer, if I'm doing something a little bit more extreme in a section and I want to reset back to what I was doing, I just press that and we're back to 0. And it's the same with this one if I want to turn the band up and down. And that enables me to really mix hands-on, but then also be able to kind of go back to where I started. Over here, we have a bunch of analog outboard that's been all selected for specific reasons. I come from a studio background, and a lot of those flavors that are imparted by this gear, I wanted to try and bring that to the live show. The band also know a lot about this stuff. They use a lot of the same stuff whenever they make these records, so it's been nice to bring some of that into the live show. We also use some stuff from sort of the software DSP side, from Waves, and that's for a lot of dynamic control in terms of EQ, reverbs, time-based effects, noise reduction, lots of noise reduction. We have a lot of inputs in this show. We have about 100 and I think I have 128 live inputs from the stage at any one time. And once you get the effects returns, auxiliary channels, etc., we get up to about 200 console channels itself. So there's a lot going on. We record everything. If the band's on stage, we do record in 2 places, actually 3 places. We record 2 places here and 1 monitor world. And that's 128 channels at 96K every single day. So I'm using Reaper as my DAW for the main record and use Pro Tools for the secondary record, which is essentially a stem record. We use that as a quick reference for shows if they want to reprogram something from lighting or video, or also if we need to create something for a festival or something that needs to be remixed, we can do it really quickly. And because all the stem stuff is post-processing, it makes my life a lot easier and I can sort of pick it up a lot quicker than working through a really significant multi-track. The show uses a lot of timecode elements in the lighting and video side of things. And when we started putting the show together, it made sense to me quite quickly that we would need to do something similar. So the show runs kind of on a rail for bits of it. There's still a lot of mixing. There's elements though that I couldn't really do without having the timecode being able to follow some of those bits of automation. We have a lot going on in terms of how the show runs, not just in songs, but also incidental moments, segues, changes of scene. again, as I said earlier, it's a very theatrical show at times. So every song has a snapshot, and in between those snapshots within certain songs, they also have, I call them subshots. It's basically the song starts, but you've got like a verse moment or a chorus moment, and those all follow using the time code that's derived from the stage, just like lighting and video. It means that the impact of that scene change is instant, not X amount of milliseconds later on how I respond to that at front of house. If I'm at a front of house tent at a festival, I'm at 150 milliseconds behind time zero. When it goes out to the broadcast, for example, I'm late. So trying to do the things that are really time critical on that end has been super helpful and has yielded really good results. I've also started to dive into using the time code to fire MIDI program change from QLab to be able to utilize macros in a different way on the Quantum 7, because some things that I want to happen are, again, incidental. I don't want them to necessarily take up an entire snapshot. Having the ability to just do something quickly, whether it's like move this thing over there or change the length of the reverb time or the stereo spread. It's really nice to be able to just have that as a little moment. I'm trying to sort of create psychoacoustic cues for everyone that's listening. When we started putting this show together, some bits have changed, but most of it's kind of stayed the same. And as I said, everything's been kind of chosen for a reason, so I will go through some of that with you. Up top, we have the Bus Plus by SSL, which is the entire mix bus. I think it sounds fantastic. It has some extra features in it that have been created for this new version, developed upon the G-Bus compressor that I sort of grew up with when I worked in a studio before I started touring live. I kind of cut my teeth working on an SSL 4K, and the sound of that bus compressor is synonymous, like it has a sound to it. And I wanted to bring some of that element to the live show, but I don't use it very heavily. Most of the dynamic control in the show is quite low ratio with a couple of exceptions, but for the most part, I like keeping the dynamics in the show. So nothing's really getting slammed unless there's a very good reason for it. So the whole mix bus, so that's the music bus, the vocal, the BVs, etc., everything hits the Bus Plus. I kind of use it in a pretty simple way, but what's really nice is being able to run it really low ratio. So I run it at 1.5 to 1. It's only doing about 2, maybe 3 dB at times when they're really hitting it hard. And it's on the new Auto 2 release and an attack of 10. And it just creates this nice little sort of hug that helps just tame some elements, but not in an extreme way. And when you bypass it, you really miss it. So I kind of set those settings back when I had one on demo in October 2022, and I haven't really changed it. I have been experimenting with using it in mid-side mode, and that's really cool to be able to, you know, keep your center image really solid, but keep the sides to breathe a bit better. It works on some things, but for this show, every time I go back to the classic stereo setting, it just sounds great. So I'm still there. So yeah, big shout out to SSL. They've been really good to me on this tour, getting me one out to demo in Lidditz when we were rehearsing. Then the next unit is a MAG EQ 4M, which is a mastering grade EQ, and it's kind of the top-down element of my mix bus. So it's only the band, so there's no vocals that hit it, but it enables me to utilize the air band, which is this really nice top end that helps just lift elements out of the show. Same with the sub stuff, and the very specific EQ points that they have are very musical, and being able to just add in even half a dB on this D&B GSL system is audible. It's a very salt and pepper to taste EQ, but it's changed how my music bus sounds, so I'm super happy with it. The next 2 or 3 units are all Maddie's vocal chain. Maddie's got a super dynamic vocal. He sings super quiet and super loud, so trying to get that to sit in a pocket for a big rock show with a big PA and also a broadcast requires sort of different stages in the process. So there's a Rupert Neve 5045. Honestly, I can't really imagine doing a gig without one of those. Doesn't matter who the band is. It really helps try and tame a loud stage or a loud room. Thankfully on this gig we have very little stage volume, but we also have very loud audiences. So what you do end up getting is a lot of audience and room back into open microphones, of which we have a lot. For that main channel, it's super important that I have something that I can grab and is very tactile. And it's become pretty invisible. I kind of forget it's there most of the time. And then every now and then I'll bypass it and be like, yeah, I know why I still have that. So yeah, I've been using those since maybe 2018. I own a couple of the 500 series ones myself as well. That's a really important part of this vocal chain. The second channel of it is also on our guest, if we ever have a guest, for the same reasons. Empirical Labs Distressor is my favorite compressor. I would have an entire rack of them if I could. They just work on everything. And they have this thing, this very delicate sweet spot when you get it right, where you get a tonal imprint on the vocal that helps cut through a really dense mix, but also provides really rapid dynamic control, and that's exactly what I need on this show. I've been trying to use more serial compression for my vocals in recent years so that you don't have one compressor that's doing lots of gain reduction. So I've chosen two very different compressors that are in line with each other. I've tried a couple over this cycle, and I've settled on this GML dynamic control unit. Dynamic gain control, that's what it's called, which is an absolute box of wizardry, and I'm still trying to figure out how it really works. But the serial compression means that I can have the distressor doing all the fast attack stuff and the GML doing much more sort of RMS slow reaction. And sometimes one will be doing gain reduction and the other will not. And it's how they interact with each other that's really great. And the GML is super clean. I'm really, really happy with how they're working together. I use the second channel of that GML for his acoustic. Again, very transparent compressor. Even if it's doing a bunch of gain reduction, it sounds really good. Beyond that, we have the API 2500 Plus, which is a huge part of my drum sound because it enables me to do analog parallel compression. Instead of running two groups in my console, I have one drum bus and everything hits the 2500, and I run it 50-50 blend of wet dry, which is something that I was actually inspired by Ryan Hewitt, the mix engineer. And I've experimented with a lot of the different tone functions, you know, the new old feedback, feed forward. And these are the settings that I sort of dialed in rehearsals. And again, they haven't really changed. And the way that the drums hit into that and being able to push certain things into it during the show to make it react more, it just creates this absolutely monster drum sound. And I couldn't really imagine doing it without it either. I mean, everything in here is chosen because I want tactile control, as well as it's sounding a certain way. But the tactile control is really important. For the bass, I chose the Shelfer channel because it gave me a bunch of really great sounding stuff in one U. You know, with touring, you have to think about rack density as well. You get so much bang for your buck in one U. It sounds fantastic, and being able to tweak mid-range in the show and the interaction between it and the compressor, which is super nice and kind of lends itself really well for bass. And I'm a big fan of silk. I'd have silk everywhere if I could. So the red silk's been amazing to get the bass just to sort of cut through the guitars. Whenever you've got a couple of guitars playing all at the same time and there's a bandwidth masking thing in the high mid, being able to push mid into the bass group and then getting that compressor to park it in a place, as much as adding the red silk to just lift the HF and make it bloom a bit more, has been super good. And again, when you bypass it, it's a night and day. So big fan of that. On the guitar bus, we have a UBK Fatso, which is derived from the Empirical Labs Fatso. They do two different things between the two units, and I chose this one because there's something about how it works in the low-mid region that lends itself really nicely to guitars. I'm not a huge fan of compression on guitars because a lot of the time these sounds are inherently compressed. I really like saturation. So I use the UBK to basically create a little bit of a hug on the entire guitar bus. So everyone's guitars go into this stereo, and it's set up in such a way that when you have the orchestra of guitars playing simultaneously, that you're creating this nice sort of dynamic saturation in the high mid and the high end. But I also employ the transformer circuit as well, which adds this really nice sort of almost like a tape head bump in the low mid. A couple of my good friends who are using this unit recommended to me that I try and use a attenuator in the sidechain circuit, which is a huge part of the guitar sound, because using the attenuator I can change the balance between the detector circuits of the compressor and the saturation. So I can either have lots of compression and no saturation, or I can have lots of saturation and no compression. And I actually kind of run it 50-50, but if it's getting a bit spicy in the guitars on some shows, I can actually ride that as a thing using this little radial monitor controller at the bottom of my rack. The next bit is another distressor, which started off live as a spare because it's a pretty critical compressor for the vocal. So I wanted to have another one on hand, but I felt bad that it wasn't getting any love. So I was trying to figure out where in the show I could really benefit from the sonic characteristics of another distressor. And on stage, on the drum kit, we actually use underheads for a couple of reasons, some sonic, some visual. But we have a mono ribbon, a Bayer Dynamic M160, which is sort of a kit capture. And the band's latest record, there's a lot of drum sounds on that, which are very much sort of like 2 or 3 mics, Glyn John Z style kind of captures. So I thought it'd be quite cool to see if I could emulate it. And for songs like Part of the Band, All I Need to Hear, etc., it's really nice, where that's actually most of the drum sound in terms of the snare and toms and even a bit of the kick. But I needed to be able to sort of do some dynamic control and impart a bit of like splat on it. So the distressor was the perfect tool for the job. I'm using it on Nuke, lots of THD and lots of distortion. And when you blend it in with everything else, it creates this really nice mono picture for a very big, wide drum sound. And then the final bits in the rack are a new addition, again from Rupert Neve Designs. Big thank you to them because they got these to me super quickly, but they are the 542 tape simulators, which I've added to the drum bus as a secondary insert. I mean, they sound amazing. I'm so bummed that I didn't try them sooner. But we added them in rehearsals back in February. I had them at home and I tried them, just tried some settings out. And again, I found a setting that I really like and I haven't really touched them. So they've integrated super well. They do that thing that like 15 IPS tape does. So there's a ton of head bump in the low mid, and then I run the saturation full, but then I pull the mix to 50-50. And then I use a fair bit of red silk to try and bring up the HF clarity from the saturation. But the whole thing has made the snare drum thicker, the toms longer, the cymbals have this really nice shimmer and sheen now. So yeah, fantastic units. I'm super, super happy with them. And then quickly, just on the other side, I have 2 outboard effects units. I'm a huge fan of the H3000. But we all kind of know that they're not very reliable on the road. And this band really have toured very hard on this cycle and the gear's been through a lot. So I ended up going for an Eventide Eclipse, which meant that I could run it on AES, which was quite helpful. And I just use that on a very basic Eventide classic micro pitch for Maddie's vocal. And then the final unit in there is a OG Sans amp. And I'm actually using that as a parallel effects processor, and it changes from song to song what I use it on. Sometimes it's on vocals, sometimes it's on bass, sometimes it's on drums, sometimes it's all 3. I was just wanting something to create that really gnarly, standard, de facto Sans ampy kind of distortion sound that's on so many records and also quite a lot of live shows. I remember seeing Muse a long time ago and being fascinated with how they were getting vocal distortions, and I then quickly found out that they were using Sans amp PSAs. So I now own 3 of them myself. I put one for each rig and I've got one at home in my studio. And I run it on a really basic Mesa Boogie preset, and it sounds absolutely insane on its own, but blended in and sort of timed, it creates this really nice aggression for certain parts of the show. And that's the rig. Thank you so much for watching, and a huge thank you to 8th Day for making this all possible for this entire tour. Their support's been phenomenal and have made this possible on a daily basis. So yeah, thanks very much, and I'll see you next time.